Nal was the embodiment of beauty and ambition. Born and raised in Nairobi, she had always envisioned a life of luxury, love, and success. But she quickly realized that achieving all three was not easy, at least, not with just one man. By day, she was the devoted girlfriend of William, a wealthy European businessman who adored her and promised her a life of comfort. By night, she was passionately entwined with Kwame, a strong and charismatic African man whose love set her soul ablaze. Juggling these two worlds was no easy task, yet Nala had mastered the art of deception. However, deep in her heart, she knew secrets had a way of surfacing when least expected. Despite the danger of her double life, Nala reveled in the best of both worlds. With William, she enjoyed expensive dinners, luxurious gifts, and the promise of a stable future abroad. With Kwame, she felt alive in ways that money could never buy. Their connection was electric, their love untamed. But as time passed, maintaining the illusion became more exhausting. Both men wanted more from her, and she could feel the walls closing in. She reassured herself that she was in control, but fate had other plans. One evening, as she lay beside Kwame, a sudden wave of nausea washed over her. It was the third time that week. Her mind raced with the possibility that she had been avoiding. She needed answers. The next day, she visited a clinic, her heart pounding as she awaited the doctor's verdict. When he finally spoke, his words sent a chill down her spine. "Congratulations, Miss Nal. You're expecting twins." Nal's mind went blank. Twins. This was not part of her plan. Panic gripped her as she realized the terrifying truth. There was no way to tell which man was the father. Nal sat alone in her apartment, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her beauty, once her greatest weapon, now felt like a curse. How was she going to handle this? How could she continue playing both men when she carried the ultimate truth within her? Fear whispered in her ear, but so did her ambition. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could still come out on top. Her first decision was to tell both men they were going to be fathers. She met William at an elegant restaurant, choosing her words carefully. "I have wonderful news, love. We're having a baby," she said, her voice laced with excitement. His eyes widened in joy, and he pulled her into his arms. "This is the best thing that has ever happened to me. We'll raise our child together, Nal. I'll give you both the best life imaginable." She forced a smile, swallowing the guilt that threatened to consume her. 2 days later, she met Kwame under their favorite acacia tree, where their love had blossomed. "I have something to tell you," she whispered. "I'm pregnant." His response was pure, raw emotion. "This is a blessing, Nala. I will be the best father. We will raise this child with love." His genuine excitement sent a pang of guilt through her chest, but she pushed it aside. As long as she could maintain the illusion, she could still have it all. Yet, in the quiet moments when she was alone, the weight of her deception grew heavier. She had trapped herself in a game she could no longer control. And the day she gave birth would be the day her carefully built world would crumble. Months passed, and Nal grew increasingly anxious. She had managed to keep both men content, spinning elaborate lies to justify her actions. William had begun planning for their child's arrival, buying clothes, setting up a nursery in his European villa, and talking about moving Nala abroad. Kwame, on the other hand, spoke of naming their baby after his grandmother and starting a small business to provide for their future. With every passing day, her guilt mounted. She had convinced herself she could handle this, but she hadn't accounted for the moment of truth of the birth. When the time finally came, Nal went into labor in a private hospital, courtesy of William's generosity. She clutched her belly as the contractions tore through her, knowing that the moment she saw her children, everything would change. As she struggled through the pain, fear consumed her. What would she say? How would she explain it? Hours later, the cries of 2 newborns filled the room, but the moment the nurse placed them in her arms, she gasped. One baby was fair-skinned, with soft brown curls and light eyes, unmistakably William's child. The other had deep brown skin, his features a mirror image of Kwame's. It was undeniable. The truth was now visible for the world to see. Before she could process the situation, Both William and Kwame arrived at the hospital, eager to meet their child. Nal's breath hitched as they stood on either side of the bed, staring in disbelief. Silence hung heavy in the room before William spoke, his voice tight. "Nala, what is this?" Kwame's eyes darkened with realization, his jaw tightening as he pieced it together. The facade had finally shattered. Nala had no words. Her lips trembled as she looked from one man to the other, her deception laid bare in the most undeniable way. William turned pale, his hands gripping the edge of the hospital crib. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is," he demanded, his voice laced with betrayal. Kwame remained silent, his fists clenched, his breath deep and controlled. He had always trusted Nal, believed in their love, but now he could feel it slipping away. The tension in the room was suffocating. Nala tried to speak, but no words formed. Finally, she took a shaky breath and whispered, "I never meant for this to happen." But the excuse sounded hollow even to her own ears. She had thought she could control everything, yet here she was, exposed and helpless. William scoffed, stepping back as realization dawned. "So that's it? You've been lying to me all along? Was I just a meal ticket to you?" His voice cracked at the end, his hurt spilling through the anger. Kwame, though equally betrayed, remained quiet. He wasn't a man of many words, and right now words wouldn't do justice to what he was feeling. He simply turned away, his silence far more painful than any outburst. Nala reached for them, desperation creeping into her voice. "Please, But neither man was ready to listen. William stormed out, leaving behind shattered dreams of a future together. Kwame gave her one last look, his expression unreadable, before walking away. And just like that, the perfect life she had crafted fell apart before her eyes. Nal sat in her hospital bed, staring blankly at the empty doorway. Both men had walked away, their love for her buried beneath layers of betrayal. She knew this moment would come, yet she had clung to the illusion that she could control it. Now all she had left were her two innocent sons, one a reflection of William, the other of Kwame. As she traced their tiny fingers, guilt clawed at her chest. No matter how much she wished to turn back time, the damage had been done. She had played a dangerous game and lost everything. The days that followed were filled with loneliness and uncertainty. William had frozen all financial support, leaving her with unpaid medical bills and no way to afford a comfortable life for the twins. Kwame, despite his anger, visited the hospital once to see his son. He barely looked at Nal, his presence cold and distant. "I'll take care of my son," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "But you and we're done." His words were like a knife to her chest. She had broken the heart of the one man who had loved her without conditions. With no stable income and no one to turn to, Nal was forced to move back to her childhood home, a small, cramped space she had vowed never to return to. Her mother welcomed her with a disappointed sigh, making it clear that Nal had dug her own grave. "You were always chasing riches, thinking love could be bought. Now look where that's gotten you." Nala bit back tears, holding her sons closer. She had to fix this. She had to rebuild. But first, she had to survive. Nala's life had taken a drastic turn. Gone were the elegant dinners and silk dresses. In their place were sleepless nights and the struggle to afford diapers. She took odd jobs, working at a local market during the day and washing clothes for neighbors at night. It was humiliating, people whispered when she passed, shaking their heads at the girl who had once lived like a queen. "She thought she was better than us," they murmured. "Look at her now." Kwame, though still distant, provided for his son, sending money monthly and visiting when he could. But he refused to acknowledge Nala beyond their child. William, on the other hand, remained a ghost, unwilling to face the situation. He had fled back to Europe, leaving only silence in his wake. The contrast between the two men stung her. One had been rich but absent, the other poor but present, and she had deceived them both. One evening, as she sat outside her mother's house feeding her sons, an old friend approached. It was Amina, a woman Nal had once dismissed for not being ambitious enough. Yet Amina was now a successful fabric trader, running her own business. "I heard what happened," Amina said, sitting beside her. You need a fresh start, Nala. Use what you have left your strength. Build something real. Her words stayed with Nala all night. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe Amina was right. Maybe she could still rise from this. Determined to regain control of her life, Nala took a leap of faith. With Amina's guidance, she started selling African fabrics, using what little savings she had to buy a small stock. At first, business was slow. Customers hesitated, still wary of the woman whose scandal had become neighborhood gossip. But Nal persisted. She swallowed her pride, worked tirelessly, and gradually built a clientele. As her business grew, so did her confidence. She no longer relied on Kwame's support, nor did she dwell on William's absence. Instead, she focused on her sons and the future she was creating for them. The journey wasn't easy. There were days she barely made enough to eat, nights she cried herself to sleep, but she kept pushing forward. Kwame noticed the change. He saw the woman who had once deceived him, now working harder than ever, refusing to take shortcuts. One evening, after picking up his son, he lingered for the first time in months. You're different, he observed. I have to be, Nala replied. For them. Kwame nodded, as if seeing her for the first time. It was a small moment, but it meant everything. Meanwhile, William reappeared. He sent an email, short and emotionless. I want to see my son. Nala's hands trembled as she read the words. Was she ready for this? More importantly, was he? William's return was unexpected. After months of silence, he arrived in Nairobi, his demeanor unreadable. When he saw his son for the first time, a storm of emotions crossed his face. Relief, sadness, guilt. He reached out hesitantly, and the boy, too young to understand, simply stared. He's beautiful, William murmured. But the reunion was not without tension. Why now? Nala asked, crossing her arms. You abandoned him. William's jaw tightened. I needed time. I was angry, betrayed. But I never stopped thinking about him. His voice softened. I don't want to take him from you. I just want to be in his life. It was a difficult offer to accept, but Nal knew she could not deny her son the right to know his father. So with cautious steps, she allowed William into their lives, supervised visits at first, brief interactions. Over time, the child warmed to him, and Nal saw glimpses of the man she had once cared for. Kwame, however, was wary. He left once. What makes you think he won't leave again? Nala had no answer. She didn't trust William completely, but she had changed. She would not use her son as a pawn anymore. She would give him the chance to prove himself. And so, for the first time since her deception was exposed, Nal found herself in unfamiliar territory. Not as a woman caught between two men, but as a mother fighting for her children's best future. With William re-entering their lives, Nal found herself caught between two fathers. Co-parenting was far from easy. William was used to structure and efficiency, while Kwame valued an organic, hands-on approach to fatherhood. Their conflicting parenting styles often led to tension, and Nal found herself acting as a mediator. Though she no longer had romantic ties to either of them, she knew that for the sake of her children, she had to maintain peace. Meanwhile, her business continued to grow. Word spread that Nal's fabric store carried unique and high-quality designs, and soon she was receiving bulk orders from local designers. With Amina's guidance, she expanded, hiring 2 assistants to help manage the increasing demand. Success tasted sweeter knowing she had built it with her own 2 hands. But even with financial independence, she couldn't ignore the storm brewing in her personal life. One evening, Kwame confronted her. I don't trust him, Nal. I see the way he's trying to buy his way in. Don't let him take our son. His voice was filled with genuine concern. Nal sighed. He has a right to be here, Kwame. Our son deserves to know him. Kwame didn't argue, but his silence spoke volumes. She knew that despite his co-parenting efforts, his wounds hadn't fully healed. Then William dropped a bombshell. I want to take him to Europe for a few months, he announced over coffee. Nal nearly choked on her drink. You can't just uproot him like that. He has a life here. William's face was calm but firm. He has a life with me too. The conversation left her shaken. For the first time in months, she felt the fear of losing everything all over again. William's request to take his son to Europe turned into a legal nightmare. He filed for temporary custody, claiming that his son would have better opportunities abroad. Kwame was livid, immediately pushing back. "You left! Now you want to dictate where he grows up? Over my dead body!" The tension between the two men exploded in court, with Nal caught in the middle. The legal proceedings were draining. Nal had fought so hard to build stability, yet now she was at risk of losing one of her children for months at a time. The judge listened carefully to both sides before making a ruling. William could have extended visits, but the child's primary home would remain with Nala. It was a victory, but an exhausting one. After court, Kwame confronted Nala. "You need to be careful, Nala. This isn't over. He has money, influence. He can try again." She nodded, feeling the weight of her choices pressing down on her shoulders. Despite the court ruling, William tried to persuade Nala in private. "You know he'll have a better future with me," he said one evening. Nala looked at him, searching for the man she once thought she loved. "Maybe, but a future without love means nothing, and I won't let him grow up feeling like an obligation." Over the following months, Nala worked tirelessly to create a sense of unity for her children. Though tensions lingered, William gradually accepted the reality that his son's life was rooted in Africa. Instead of trying to pull him away, he began investing in the boy's future, sending school fees, setting up a trust fund, and even visiting more frequently without tension. Kwame, seeing this shift, softened as well. One day, after a routine drop-off, he extended his hand to William. "We don't have to like each other, but we both love our son. Let's focus on that." It was an uneasy truce, but it was progress. Nala exhaled, relieved. Meanwhile, her business reached new heights. She was invited to a major fashion expo where her work was praised. She had finally found her identity outside of the men in her life. But something was still missing. One evening as she closed her shop, she found herself thinking about companionship, about love. She had spent so much time fixing the past. Was she ready to move forward? It started as friendship. David, a local entrepreneur, met Nala at a networking event. Unlike the men of her past, he didn't try to impress her with wealth or promises. He simply listened, encouraged, and respected her space. Their connection was effortless, but Nala hesitated. Could she allow herself to love again? Kwame noticed the change in her, the way she smiled more, the quiet joy in her eyes. "You deserve to be happy, Nala," he said one evening, "but make sure it's for the right reasons." His words stayed with her. She wasn't the same woman who once chased after comfort and status this time. She wanted something real. As David continued to show up for her, not just as a romantic interest, but as a friend, Nala felt something shift within her. Maybe love wasn't about grand gestures or fleeting passion. Maybe it was about consistency, about someone choosing you every single day. Just as Nala was beginning to embrace her future, William dropped another unexpected bombshell. He was moving back to Africa permanently. "I want to be closer to my son," he explained. "I don't want to miss any more years." Nala was wary but agreed that it was best for their child. But as William reintegrated into their lives, he brought an unspoken tension. Was he trying to win her back? Kwame was the first to notice. "You need to set clear boundaries with him. He doesn't just want his son, Nala. He wants you." The realization hit hard. William was more present, more invested, more considerate. But was it too late? Could she ever love him again? One evening, William confessed, "I made mistakes, Nal, but I never stopped loving you. We can be a family again." The words should have excited her, but instead they filled her with doubt. She wasn't the woman he had once known. She had fought too hard to become independent, to build a life outside of being someone's partner. "I need time," she whispered, and this time she meant it. Nal found herself at a crossroads. With William back in Africa and David showing genuine interest, she knew she had to make a decision not based on fear or comfort, but on what truly made her happy. Her past had been filled with choices dictated by greed and desperation. But now she sought clarity. She spent her days focusing on her children and her business, avoiding unnecessary entanglements. Kwame remained a steady presence, co-parenting with her in a way that felt natural. Yet she noticed the subtle changes in his demeanor. He seemed at peace with his role, but she wondered if he had truly moved on. David, on the other hand, was patient. He never pressured her for more than she could give. He admired her strength and independence, qualities she had fought so hard to develop. One evening, after a long day at work, he met her at the shop and helped her close up. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," he told her, his voice steady. "But just know that love doesn't have to be complicated." His words resonated deeply, reminding her of everything she had once overlooked in pursuit of a life she thought she wanted. Meanwhile, William continued to prove his commitment to fatherhood. He no longer pushed for Nal's affection, but instead focused on being a present father. He showed up for school events, contributed financially, and created a bond with his son that had been missing for years. Though Nal still harbored reservations, she had to admit that he was finally becoming the father their son deserved. It was a relief, but it also stirred something in her. Did he genuinely care now, or was it just guilt? As she lay in bed that night, she realized something profound. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of being alone. She had built something for herself, and whether or not love found its way back into her life, she would be just fine. With time, the tension between William and Kwame eased. Though they would never be friends, they had found a way to coexist. Kwame was still wary, but he respected that William was now stepping up as a father. Their interactions, once laced with animosity, became civil, and even their son began to sense the shift. Nala observed this dynamic with quiet relief. She had spent so much time worrying about the men in her life clashing that she hadn't considered what could happen if they worked together. It was a fragile balance, but it was progress. The more they focused on their son, the less their past conflicts mattered. David remained a constant support, never interfering, but always there when she needed him. He saw the challenges she faced and never sought to make himself the center of her world. "You've come a long way, Nala," he told her one evening as they walked along the beach. "You don't have to rush anything. Just be happy." His patience was unlike anything she had experienced before, and it was in that moment she realized that love wasn't just about passion, it was about peace. One day, Kwame approached her unexpectedly. "I don't regret loving you," he admitted, "but I finally understand that what we had wasn't meant to last. I just want us to be good parents." His words, though bittersweet, were freeing. Nala nodded, a weight lifting off her shoulders. It was the closure they both needed. Nala's business had grown beyond her wildest dreams. What started as a small fabric shop had transformed into a brand recognized beyond Nairobi. She had secured partnerships, employed more workers, and even begun exporting her designs. The same society that once ridiculed her now celebrated her success. But more than that, she was proud of herself. One afternoon, she was invited to speak at a women's empowerment event. Standing before a crowd of young women, she told her story not as a cautionary tale, but as proof that mistakes don't define you. "I chased wealth and love without understanding myself," she confessed. "But the moment I chose to build my own future, everything changed." The applause was thunderous, but the real victory was within her. She had finally become the woman she was meant to be. David was in the audience smiling. He had always seen her potential, but now she saw it for herself. "So what's next?" he asked after the event. Nal smiled. "Whatever I choose." And for the first time, she meant it. With her life finally stable, Nala allowed herself to embrace the idea of love again. But this time, she wasn't looking for a man to complete her. She was looking for a partner. And David, with his quiet strength and unwavering support, was the only man who had never asked her to be anything but herself. Their relationship grew naturally. There was no rush, no desperation, no deception. She told him everything about her past, and instead of judgment, he simply said, "That's not who you are anymore." Those words meant everything. Meanwhile, William had also moved on. He met someone new, a woman who understood the complexities of his life and supported his journey as a father. It was a relief to Nal, knowing that his presence in their son's life was no longer tied to her. Kwame, too, had found someone, and the tension between them eased completely. For the first time in years, there were no lingering conflicts, only co-parenting, mutual respect, and a future built on honesty. Nala was determined to raise her sons differently. She had learned the hard way that love should never be built on lies or selfish desires. She taught them integrity, strength, and the importance of choosing the right path, even when it was difficult. She had once feared being alone, but now she cherished her independence. She had built a life not defined by men, but by her own choices. David was part of her journey, but he was not the reason for her happiness. She was. One evening, as they sat on her balcony, David took her hand. "I love you, Nala, not because you need me, but because you don't." And in that moment, she knew she had finally found the kind of love she had always deserved. Nala's success continued to soar, but the greatest victory was her peace of mind. She no longer sought validation in others. She had faced her mistakes, rebuilt her life, and found happiness on her own terms. She loved and was loved in return, but most importantly, she loved herself. For the first time in years, she felt whole, not because of a man or material wealth, but because of the strength she had cultivated within herself. Her children were growing up in a home filled with stability and love. She had broken the cycle of deception and insecurity, ensuring they would never have to experience the pain she once endured. She had become the mother she wished she'd had, one who led by example, who showed them the importance of honesty, perseverance, and self-respect. Seeing them thrive was the greatest reward of all. Kwame and William had also settled into their roles as fathers, and co-parenting had become seamless. There were no longer bitter disputes or old wounds dictating their interactions. Instead, they had reached a place of mutual understanding. Nal no longer felt torn between two worlds. She had built a new one, a balanced one, where she dictated her own destiny. Her business continued to flourish, opening doors she had never imagined possible. She was no longer just a woman who had once made mistakes. She was a role model for young women in her community. The scars of her past remained, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they served as reminders of how far she had come. Years later, Nal stood at another speaking event, this time addressing young women aspiring to become entrepreneurs. "Your past does not define you," she told them. "Only your choices do." Her words resonated deeply as she looked into the eyes of those who, like her, had faced adversity and struggled to find their place in the world. She had once been in their shoes, unsure of her worth, but now she stood as living proof that change was possible. After her speech, she stepped off the stage, her children running into her arms. Their laughter filled the air, and in that moment, she realized that every hardship, every challenge, had been worth it. David stood nearby, his eyes filled with admiration. He had never tried to define her happiness, only to support it. That was what real love was, choosing someone not because they needed you, but because you wanted to stand beside them as equals. She and David had built a love based on trust and understanding, not dependency. Unlike her past relationships, it wasn't about power or security. It was about mutual respect and companionship. They had taken their time, allowing love to blossom naturally, and now she was confident in the life they had built together. He had never tried to rescue her, and that made all the difference. As she walked forward with her family, Nal felt nothing but gratitude. She had learned, grown, and transformed into the woman she was always meant to be. She no longer looked back with regret, only with appreciation for the lessons that had shaped her. Her journey had been long, but she had arrived exactly where she was meant to be. And with that, she embraced the future, one of love, purpose, and unshakable strength.